In the skies of 1915 and 1916, war still carried a strange sense of civility. Pilots waved to their enemies before opening fire, and duels were fought not for annihilation, but for honor. The air war was young, untainted by the brutal efficiency that would soon come to define it. Canvas biplanes buzzed above the trenches like dragonflies over a stagnant pond, their engines sputtering, their pilots exposed to wind and sky. Encounters were fleeting. A burst of machine gun fire, a graceful turn, then a nod of respect as the duel ended. Newspapers back home romanticized these nights of the air, while generals still viewed them as sideshows, their reconnaissance reports more curiosity than command tool. In makeshift hangars, mechanics patched torn wings with fabric and glue. Oil-stained laughter echoed between the rafters. The pilots, young and restless, traded stories of aerial adventures, daring escapes, and harmless skirmishes over no man's land. The war on the ground was hellish, but up here above the mud and wire there was still poetry. No one yet understood how fragile that innocence was. They believed the air belonged to the brave, not the brutal, to men who fought for glory, not domination. It was a fleeting moment in history, a time when the roar of engines still carried the sound of laughter, not fear. Soon, that laughter would fade. A new kind of predator was coming, painted in red, and destined to turn the sky itself into a weapon. It began as a rumor whispers from the Western Front carried across mess halls and aerodromes. A German plane, they said, painted a shocking crimson hue, cutting through formations like fire through silk. To most, it was absurd. A red airplane? Austrian pilots chuckled over coffee and cigarettes. Why not a golden one next? Italians joined in the jest, joking that such a target would be visible from Vienna to Venice. Even in British hangars, the story was met with amused disbelief. Pilots swapped sketches of fanciful scarlet machines, emblazoned with devil horns and dragon wings. The sky, they said, was no place for theatrics. Real pilots relied on skill and subtlety, not spectacle. Camouflage was wisdom, color was folly. Who would be foolish enough to invite every gun in France to fire at them? But behind those dismissive smiles, something uneasy stirred. Reports began piling up, patrols disappearing without trace, reconnaissance craft ambushed by a single plane that seemed to appear and vanish like a phantom. The laughter quieted, but pride held firm. No one wanted to admit that a single pilot, one with the arrogance to fly in red, might have rewritten the rules of the air. And so the mocking continued, even as the legend grew. The Crimson Machine was still a myth, a soldier's exaggeration, a rumor dressed in bright paint. But the skies were changing. The chivalric duels were ending. Soon, the laughter in the hangars would give way to silence and to awe as the Red Baron rose from rumor into history. Before the world knew him as the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen was a cavalry officer, proud, restless, and increasingly irrelevant. When the Great War began, he rode through fields believing that gallantry and courage could still decide battles. But soon, the thunder of horses gave way to the thunder of guns. The front froze into trenches, and Richthofen found himself useless, his saber dull against machine gun fire. He wrote of frustration, the emptiness of standing in mud while the war moved above his head. The romance of the charge had vanished, replaced by barbed wire and shells. "I did not join the army to dig trenches," he confessed. Then came the aircraft, flimsy, dangerous, and new. The air offered freedom, movement, and purpose. Transferring to the Imperial Air Service, Richthofen found himself at the edge of a revolution. He learned to fly not as a daredevil, but as a soldier reborn. Every takeoff was a mission to reclaim the lost nobility of combat. In the sky, he discovered clarity. No trenches, no orders lost in chaos. Just one man against another, measured by skill and nerve. It was here, above the suffocating earth, that Manfred von Richthofen began to shed his past. The cavalryman who once rode across fields now rode the wind, still chasing honor, but in a deadlier form. The hunter had found his new horse, and its wings were made of canvas and steel. Every legend begins with a teacher, And for Richthofen, that mentor was Captain Oswald Bolk, the father of modern air combat. Bolk was calm where others were reckless, analytical where others sought glory. To fly with him was to glimpse a future in which the air war would be fought with science, not chance. Bolk's dicta, his rules of aerial engagement, were more than strategy, they were philosophy. Attack from the sun, he taught. Never turn your back on an enemy. Always maintain a height advantage. Simple maxims that turn survival into an art form. Richthofen absorbed every word. He followed Bolk like a student in the shadow of a master painter, watching how he moved through the air, anticipating each maneuver with precision. While others chased personal glory, Bolk built formations that fought as one, disciplined, coordinated, unstoppable. Under Bolk's wing, Richthofen learned that victory wasn't about daring, it was about control. The true hunter didn't rush his prey, he studied it, circled it, and struck with mathematical certainty. When Bolk died in a mid-air collision in 1916, the shock rippled through the German air service. To Richthofen, it was more than loss, it was inheritance. The dicta became his scripture, and from its pages, he built a new vision of aerial supremacy. He would not merely survive the sky, he would master it. And soon, the hunter Bolk had shaped would rise to command his own squadron and paint his machine the color of blood. In 1917, as the air war reached new heights of complexity, the Germans unveiled a strange, almost whimsical creation, the Fokker Doctor. With 3 narrow wings stacked atop one another, it looked more like an experiment than a weapon. But behind its curious shape lay genius. Unlike the faster Allied fighters, the Dr.I was designed for agility. Its triple wings gave it a startling rate of climb and the ability to pivot almost on the spot. In the hands of an ordinary pilot, it was temperamental. In the hands of Manfred von Richthofen, it was lethal. He didn't need speed to win, only control. The triplane turned tight, responded instantly, and allowed him to dictate the rhythm of every duel. It was as if the aircraft shared his mind, a mechanical extension of instinct and discipline. But what truly set the machine apart wasn't its engineering. It was its color. Against the pale sky, one triplane gleamed a violent shade of red. It was unmistakable, unforgettable. Observers began whispering of a crimson phantom that ruled the clouds. Allied pilots described the flash of scarlet before death. To them, it wasn't a plane. It was an omen. Thus, through steel and paint, the weapon gained something rare, a soul. Richthofen's decision to paint his aircraft red was not vanity, it was strategy. In the chaos of dogfights, color was communication. Red meant challenge. Red meant dominance. It was a declaration that he did not stalk unseen, he hunted in the open. In the early days of air combat, anonymity was safety. Pilots camouflaged their machines, blending with clouds and sun. Richthofen did the opposite. He wanted to be seen. "I want the enemy to know who killed him," he said. It was brutal honesty and brilliant psychology. The color worked as intended. Stories spread through Allied squadrons about the Red Baron. Some pilots swore they could feel his presence before they saw him. Red became more than pigment, it became prophecy. A flash of crimson in the distance was enough to make young aviators falter, their confidence draining away before the fight began. For Richthofen, this was warfare of the mind. The crimson paint was a uniform, a banner, and a warning. Every encounter with the red machine reinforced the myth. Each victory etched fear deeper into the hearts of those who rose to meet him. He understood something timeless. Power is not only exercised through force, but through perception. His aircraft became a mirror reflecting Allied fear back at them, brilliant, bold, and inescapable. From that moment, the man and the machine were inseparable. The Red Baron had been born not from legend, but from design. And high above the trenches, even before his guns began to speak, the color of blood already claimed the sky. In the clear skies above the Isonzo front, where the Alps met the Adriatic, laughter once echoed through the hangars of Austria-Hungary and Italy. Their pilots had scoffed at the idea of a German ace in red. To them, the stories were exaggerations, morale-boosting myths, told by weary men on the Western Front. But that laughter died quickly when the crimson silhouette appeared over their own lines. At first, they thought it a trick of the evening light, the low sun tinting a drab machine. Then came the realization: the color did not fade with shadow. It deepened, like blood against the pale sky. Richthofen's arrival over the Adriatic was surgical. He struck with precision and vanished with ghost-like calm. Patrols returned with empty seats. Entire squadrons refused to fly without escorts. Panic spread not from numbers but from whispers. Reports flooded command posts, a red triplane, moving like a hawk. Our best men can't touch him. The myth had crossed mountains and borders, and now, even the proud pilots of the Alps felt its weight. The sky, once a place of duels and daring, became a field of dread. Every distant flicker of scarlet carried the same thought: he's here. The mockery had ended. The nightmare had begun. Richthofen's genius was not born of recklessness, but of control. His flying was deliberate, mathematical, a waltz of wind and timing. While others darted wildly through clouds, he moved with surgical calm, as if the chaos of battle obeyed his rhythm. He never chased glory. He hunted methodically. His rule was simple: see first, decide fast, strike once. Approaching from the sun, he would dive silently upon his prey. 2 synchronized machine guns, Spandaus mounted perfectly on the triplane's nose, spat a single burst, no more than a second. It was enough. The enemy plane would shudder, spiral, and fall. Then he climbed again, already scanning for his next victim. Witnesses described his attacks as both beautiful and horrifying. There was no waste, no emotion, only precision. The red machine didn't duel, it executed. To his men in Jagdstaffel 11, he was a mentor, strict, disciplined, intolerant of vanity. To his enemies, he was inevitability given wings. The sky itself seemed to bend to his will. Pilots learned to recognize his approach not by sound, but by stillness, the moment before impact, when the air grew heavy, when even the clouds seemed to hold their breath. Each engagement became a performance, a deadly choreography where timing and nerve meant survival. And in that deadly dance, Richthofen always led. By 1917, his Red Triplane had become more than an aircraft. It was a symbol of fear, of mastery, of death descending with grace. The age of the chivalrous sky duel was over. In its place, the Red Baron had written a new rule. Precision was the new poetry of war. Behind the crimson veneer of legend lay a man of flesh and fatigue. Manfred von Richthofen's journals, written in careful, soldierly script, reveal not a bloodthirsty hunter, but a thinker, precise, weary, and often burdened by the weight of survival. In April 1917, a bullet grazed his skull during combat over Wervik. For seconds that felt eternal, the Red Baron slipped between consciousness and oblivion. His triplane wavered, dipped, and somehow through reflex or instinct found its way back to German lines. The wound left more than a scar. Those close to him noted a change: quieter eyes, a measured tone, a distance from the jubilant spirit he once carried. In his letters home, he wrote to his mother not of glory, but of exhaustion. He described the cold, the loneliness, and the strange emptiness that followed each victory. "It is not courage that keeps me flying," he confessed once, "but duty. I would rather be home with my dogs." The man who terrified nations was, in private, reflective and uncertain. His fame had grown monstrous, larger than himself, consuming the quiet soldier who had once sought only to serve with precision and honor. He began to speak of premonitions that his time might be near, that even the most disciplined hunter cannot outfly fate. The myth was still soaring, but the man beneath it was slowly descending, one wound and one memory at a time. By 1918, Manfred von Richthofen was no longer merely a pilot. He was an emblem, a propaganda tool, a hero for the weary German home front. His Red Triplane graced postcards, songs, and newsprint. The Kaiser himself honored him. Yet every accolade deepened the distance between the man and the myth. He commanded Jagdgeschwader 1, the flying circus, a restless brotherhood of colorfully painted planes. To his young flyers, Richthofen was both idol and father figure, demanding discipline, forbidding reckless heroics, urging restraint where glory tempted. But even as he led them, he withdrew from them. Fame had isolated him. Every time he took off, he carried not only his own life, but the fragile morale of a nation. Each kill added to his legend, and with it, his dread. What had once been a vocation became a ritual of inevitability. He no longer hunted for challenge or thrill, but because he must. The laughter that once filled his mess tent had faded into formal briefings and long silences. He ate alone more often. His gaze lingered longer on the horizon. To his comrades, he seemed already halfway gone. Letters from those who knew him describe a strange duality, a man both revered and pitied, as though trapped in a uniform made of myth. Richthofen was no longer flying against the Allies alone. He was flying against time, against exhaustion, against the weight of his own creation. The crimson triplane remained brilliant in the sun, but inside, the man had grown shadowed. The morning sky over the Somme shimmered with spring light, pale, deceptive, almost serene. At 10:45 a.m., Manfred von Richthofen climbed into his crimson Fokker Dr.I, the machine gleaming like a bloodstain against the silver-blue horizon. Below him, the war still rumbled, smoke, mud, and broken steel stretching endlessly toward the horizon. His formation, the Flying Circus, spotted a line of British Sopwith camels crossing their patrol zone. Without hesitation, the Red Baron dipped his nose, wings slicing downward into the chaos. The chase began, spirals of smoke and contrails painting the sky like brushstrokes of violence. He locked onto one camel flown by the young Canadian, Lieutenant Wilfred Wap May. May, a novice, dived low to escape. Richthofen pursued, relentless and calm. They skimmed the treetops, engines screaming. But this time, the Baron broke his own rule. He chased too far, too low across enemy lines. On the ground, Australian anti-aircraft gunners took aim. Tracer rounds laced the air. Another camel, flown by Captain Arthur Roy Brown, dove to protect his friend, firing a burst from above. A single bullet struck Richthofen's chest. The crimson triplane wobbled, steadied, and then drifted gently down, like a wounded bird surrendering to gravity. It landed almost gracefully in a green field near Vaux-sur-Somme. When soldiers reached the wreckage, they found him still in the cockpit, gloves folded neatly, eyes open, peaceful. The king of the air was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. The death of Manfred von Richthofen sparked not only mourning but mystery. The bullet that ended the life of the world's most famous pilot came from below or above, depending on whose account one believes. Captain Roy Brown, in his combat report, claimed the kill. His burst from above matched the moment Richthofen faltered. For the Allies, the narrative was poetic, one brave Canadian saving a comrade from the Red Baron's wrath. Newspapers across the empire hailed Brown as the man who ended the legend. Yet, as the wreckage cooled and medics examined the body, questions emerged. The fatal bullet entered from the right side and traveled downward, a trajectory consistent not with Brown's attack, but with ground fire. Australian machine gunners from the 53rd Battery, positioned near Corby, reported firing as the crimson triplane passed low over their heads. Even the medical officers were divided. Some claimed the shot was from a Vickers machine gun on the ground. Others insisted Brown's rounds could have done it. In death, as in life, Richthofen became a mirror of myth, his fall claimed by all, his truth swallowed by the fog of war. The Allies buried him with full military honors. 6 British officers carried his coffin, and a wreath bore the inscription, "To our gallant and worthy foe." The mystery endures, perhaps, because it must. Legends seldom end cleanly. They fade into questions and echoes. Above that field in France, the wind still carries the faint hum of engines and the crimson ghost of a man who once ruled the sky, precise, relentless, and, in the end, heartbreakingly human. In the years after his fall, Manfred von Richthofen's name continued to soar, a ghostly contrail stretching across generations of pilots. He had not merely been a soldier, he had invented what it meant to be an ace. Before him, aerial combat was chaos, individual duels, brave but uncoordinated. After him, it became an art form governed by discipline, instinct, and respect for geometry in the sky. His mentor, Oswald Boelcke, had written the rules. Richthofen lived them to perfection. Never dive too steeply. Never chase into enemy lines. Never forget precision over passion. Those rules became the unspoken code of airmen in every nation. His dicta bulk outlived the empire that trained him. But beyond tactics, Richthofen shaped something greater, a mythology of the air. To soldiers drowning in the trenches, he was a figure from another age, the last knight. To civilians, he was both monster and marvel, proof that even in mechanized slaughter, courage could still wear a human face. His bright red triplane, once a beacon of fear, became an emblem of mastery and willpower, a symbol that even within the machinery of war, a single person could define the narrative. Every ace who rose after him from the Battle of Britain to Korea and beyond flew in his shadow. His methods were studied, his image copied, his legend never allowed to rest. Richthofen had not only ruled the skies, he had given them meaning. Yet, as the Great War dragged toward its end, the era of the lone knight faded. What began as gallantry among clouds turned into mass production squadrons replacing solo duels, formations swallowing individual glory. The chivalric code of early airmen was drowned beneath strategy, numbers, and industry. By 1918, air combat was no longer a gentleman's pursuit, it was an equation of altitude, fuel, and firepower. Planes became faster, deadlier, and more disposable. Pilots were no longer artists, they were instruments of doctrine. The Red Baron's crimson triplane, once unique, soon seemed an artifact, a relic of idealism, amid the grinding gears of total war. The new machines, painted in camouflage instead of color, symbolized a world where survival mattered more than spectacle. Richthofen's death, then, was more than the loss of a man. It was the death of an idea that even in war, honor could be visible. The skies would remain battlegrounds, but never again would they hold that strange purity of duel and daring. And yet echoes lingered. His story became the seed of aviation lore, inspiring pilots long after propellers gave way to jet engines. His legend endured not for the lives he took, but for the discipline, restraint, and respect that defined how he fought them. As the 20th century accelerated into darker, faster wars, one red plane remained suspended in memory, frozen between the mechanical and the human, between death and grace. Above the clouds, his ghost still flies, not as a killer, but as a reminder that even amid destruction, there once was beauty in the courage to rise.